gospel that we just heard could probably be listed as one of Jesus' greatest hits. That phrase, the Good Samaritan, still rattles around commonly in our lives today. 2,000 years later, we have Good Samaritan awards, we have Good Samaritan hospitals. We all kind of know what it means, or we think we know what it means when we say a Good Samaritan. It even came into a public exchange between J.D. Vance and Pope Francis a few months ago. Good Samaritan is someone who did a good thing for someone who was in need. Go and do likewise. That's probably what we think it says. Obvious, simple, and straightforward. But Jesus' parables are never that simple and straightforward when we look at them a little more deeply. So let's probe this one a bit more. It says that a lawyer stood up. Now, this really is probably not a lawyer like we think of lawyers today. This was more a scholar of the law, particularly the Jewish understanding of the law as the Torah, which gave the shape to how life was meant to be lived. And he was a scholar of the Torah, and he rises up, and it says, the lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said to him, you're a lawyer, you ought to know this. What do you think? And the lawyer says, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, good enough. Just do that. But it's not enough. This lawyer, this scholar of the law, wants to know more. So he asks the question of Jesus, and who is my neighbor? You know, if you think about the backside of that question is, who is not my neighbor? It's trying to define something so it can be limited in some way. Who is my neighbor? So Jesus does what Jesus likes to do, which is to tell a story. A man is out on the Jericho Road. It's a dangerous backcountry road. It's a place that's known that you could likely get mugged if you were out there, and that's what happens to this guy. He's mugged, he's beaten up, everything is robbed from him, and he's left in the ditch half dead. Three characters go by: the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. Now, we're too accustomed to this story to get the impact that it had when Jesus told it. So I will share with you something that I noticed this year studying this for the first time. I probably saw it before, but this year it actually kind of clicked for me, and that is that in a lot of folk tales and fables and parables like Jesus is telling here, when there are three characters, there is what they call the rule of three. You hear that there's three characters, and you kind of know what's going to happen. So I'm going to try it out. Most of you are old enough, you should know the answer to this first one. Curly, Larry, and Moe. Yeah. A Bills fan, a Browns fan, and Steelers. All right. You got it, the rule of three. We know what that third one's going to be. If we made it a little bit more churchy, we might say a bishop, a priest, and a deacon. And that's what's happening here. Priest, a Levite, who were like the deacons of that day, and everyone would have been thinking the third one would be an Israelite. We might say a layperson. If we were telling the story, we might say the priest, the deacon, and a layperson. But it's a Samaritan. And our familiar title of the Good Samaritan would have made absolutely no sense to those people in those days. The Samaritans and the Jews had no time for each other. It was an ancient, long-standing disagreement and conflict that had settled over the centuries into just baked-in prejudice. From the Jewish perspective, there's no such thing as a good Samaritan. And from the Samaritan perspective, there's no such thing as a good Jew. So when everybody's expecting to hear Larry, Curly, and Moe, Bills fan, Browns fan, Steelers fan, bishop, priest, and deacon, priest, Levite, what? A Samaritan? Completely unexpected, unlikely, and even shocking. So the first thing we see when we dig a little bit deeper into this parable is that the Samaritan showing up to show mercy is not what anyone would have expected. Here's the second one. Jesus turns the question back on the lawyer about the neighbor. After he tells the story, he says, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" Now, it's easy to miss the subtlety there. We would naturally think that the question should be, who was the Samaritan's neighbor that he was supposed to help? Who was the hurting person that the Samaritan or anybody should love as their neighbor, as themselves? Who is that person that you are supposed to show mercy to? But Jesus flips that completely around. He says, who was the neighbor to the guy in the ditch? The question is, who is my neighbor? And Jesus is saying, the neighbor is the person who shows mercy to you. Now, most of us have probably had that experience, haven't we? Somebody who helped us when we couldn't help ourselves. Somebody who believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. Somebody who forgave us when we know we didn't deserve it. Somebody who encouraged us so that we got going, or we kept going, or we got going again. Jesus is saying, when you want to ask who is your neighbor, start there. Start with the person who's shown you mercy. Start with the times when you have received mercy. And if we push it deep enough, of course, we'll come to our Christian faith that that's what God is all about, is mercy and grace for the undeserving. Grace, the prayer book says, is God's favor, unearned and undeserved, that comes to us through the death and resurrection of Jesus. So, a friend of mine was a priest in an urban setting. He was in the city, most all of his vocation, very engaged in social action and outreach, pretty much as far left as you could be on every issue imaginable. And he retired to a little farm in New Hampshire. One day he's out in his pickup truck. The pickup truck broke down. The guy stopped and spent most of the rest of the day helping him get that truck going again. He said he found out in their conversation that there probably wouldn't be one issue in the world that they would agree on if they talked about it. But he was the guy who helped him. He said it was a great day, and he was grateful for it. Of course, we're supposed to help people. Showing mercy for people in need is at the heart of every ethical system I've ever heard of, Christian and beyond. But as Christians, we start that process by remembering, first, that we receive mercy. And we have received mercy in our lives. And ultimately, it's grounded in the mercy of God. So when we go to show mercy to others, it comes from a place of gratitude, a place of compassion. It comes from the heart.